There was a time when every gamer all around the world was asking the same question: how can I play Street Fighter 2 at home? Now, for most of us, that meant buying Street Fighter 2 on the Super Nintendo or the Sega Genesis, but those were not the only home versions of the game, not by a long shot. Now, some of these games perfectly replicated the sights and sounds of the arcade original, but some, not so much. Today, it's time for Street Fighters from around the world. Is there an echo in here? Hi, I'm Chris Kohler, and this is Complete Inbox, a series in which we take a look back at classic games by examining all the physical artifacts that came with those games and how those things changed the gameplay experience. Today, we are taking a look at not one, not two, but 3 different versions of Street Fighter 2 that even if you were a huge Street Fighter fiend, you probably never played. 1992's Street Fighter 2 Champion Edition was the first upgrade to the original Street Fighter 2. It let 2 players play as the same character in different colored outfits, and it added the game's 4 boss characters to the playable lineup. But Capcom followed Champion Edition up with Street Fighter 2 Turbo that same year in the arcades, and that meant that most home versions skipped Champion Edition and went straight to Turbo. But there were actually 2 versions of Street Fighter 2 Champion Edition that were released in Japan. One of them was for the PC-Engine, that's the Japanese version of the TurboGrafx 16, and the other was for a Japanese computer called the Sharp X68000. So one piece of trivia about Street Fighter 2 Champion Edition is that it had a different name in Japan. If you look at this logo here that's on both of these boxes, it says Street Fighter 2, and then there's a little apostrophe right here. Well, that's supposed to be pronounced dash, and the title of the game in Japan was Street Fighter 2 Dash. Now, as for this game, it does have a dash, but you know what? We're gonna get to this one a little bit later. Now, the first thing you're gonna see with both of these covers that's immediately gonna jump out at you is the incredible cover art by a Capcom artist named Shohei Okano. Kind of a legendary Capcom artist. You know, he did like Bionic Commando and Tiger Road and all kinds of other games. The game's main character, Ryu, is obviously represented here in the front, but really the focal point of this cover is M. Bison, the game's final boss, known as Vega in Japan, that's what they would have called him. And importantly, in Champion Edition, this was the very first game in which you could play as M. Bison. And really, the ability to play as those 4 boss characters, that was a really huge draw for Champion Edition. I'm gonna level with you. This X68000 version is one of the very few video games that I own where I can't play it. I cannot actually play this because I don't have a Sharp X68000 computer. It's a massive sort of tower, like an early 90s gaming PC. But this is the most beautiful home version of Street Fighter 2 in the world. It's got the clamshell, it opens up, and it's so big that the artwork is just front and center, incredibly gorgeous. So let's check out the back of these boxes, shall we? Again, we're seeing a lot of artwork here, this really gorgeous Capcom artwork that you have probably encountered at some point. And of course, you know, on the back of the X68000 box, the portraits of the 4 bosses who, again, the real big draw of this game was that you got to play these guys, and so they were really front and center in terms of the game's marketing for sure. In general, what I think is interesting about the backs of these boxes is that they're not really explaining what the game is, because they don't have to. All right, I've stared at the outside of these boxes for far too long. Again, you just wait right there, we'll get to you in a second. But for now, it's time to go inside the box. So the PC-Engine was actually the very first video game console that actually had a separate CD-ROM unit. And in fact, that was all really part of the plan from the beginning. So all of the games, not just the CD-ROM games, but also the cartridge games, came in CD-style jewel cases. So even though this is actually a jewel case, in fact, what's inside it is a cartridge game called a HuCard. That was the branding for their cartridges. Home versions of Street Fighter 2 generally had to have a lot of memory because the characters were really big, the stages were really detailed, there was a lot of stuff that had to be crammed onto the cartridges. But because all these games came on these little credit card sized things, there wasn't any room inside this card to put more memory. So they actually had to build up, which when you look at the card, this big bump here, which is storing more memory, is actually physically making the game cartridge bigger. When you were somebody buying this game back in the day and you opened it up and you saw this cartridge that physically was larger, like that was an exciting moment. That was like, oh my God, I'm getting so much video game for my money. So let's dig in to the manual. Here's the thing about this manual. This manual sucks. These days, we all kind of know, okay, well, you know, Ryu's Hadouken, the fireball, you do a quarter circle forward and you press any punch button. But back in the day, it was kind of hard to remember all of that stuff, especially when there's brand new characters in the game that you hadn't memorized the moves for. And yes, this manual does have one page for each of the characters in the game, but all it does is it just lists the names of the special moves. So the moves are printed in the manual, way in the back. And what they did was they took all of the moves and then just listed them in arbitrary order without noting what characters they belong to. So if you are, say, gonna play Vega, you know, for the first time, M. Bison, right? You're gonna play him and you wanna know how to do his Psycho Crusher. How do you do that? Well, you gotta look at the M. Bison page of the manual, and then you've gotta scroll, you know, all the way back to the end of the manual and find in that list where Psycho Crusher is listed. And you have to keep going back and forth all the time. And that is why this manual kinda stinks. And here we go. This is how you do a Street Fighter manual. We've got Ryu here, and then it lists out all of his moves and how you do those moves. That is fantastic. Yes, that's how you do a Street Fighter 2 manual. Good job, X68000 team. So if you really want to play Street Fighter 2 at home, you need a joystick. You need that arcade joystick with the big 6-button layout, right? So if you were playing on the X68000, it was actually pretty convenient because you could use the Capcom Power Stick Fighter, which was a joystick for the Super Nintendo. And you could actually use an adapter to play with that same joystick on your computer. And in fact, something really interesting about the X68000 version of Street Fighter 2 Champion Edition is that it was originally packaged with that adapter. And in fact, it even says right on the front cover, includes the personal computer adapter for the CPS Fighter joystick. And it was only after reading that and looking for it and not finding it did I realize that my copy of the game is not complete in box. So we've looked at almost everything, but we haven't actually seen the actual game yet. Here are the actual floppy disks for Street Fighter 2 on the X68000. They have used this artwork that we keep seeing, this artwork of Chun-Li's eyeballs, and have used it to really great effect. So of course, as you might imagine, it's kind of a pain in the neck to actually play this game off of the floppy disks if you don't have a hard drive, but still overall, just a truly gorgeous packaging design. All right, I've kept you in suspense long enough. What on earth is this thing? Yes, it is Street Fighter 2 for the Sega Master System. So in the US, the Sega Master System was actually discontinued in 1992, but this game actually came out in 1997 in Brazil, where the Master System was still really popular. So the box art on this is actually the same box art that was used on the Sega Genesis game, Street Fighter 2 Special Champion Edition. So this game, on the other hand, is this sort of weird pastiche of many different elements from a lot of Street Fighter games, but it's really its closest to Champion Edition, and you can see, I mean, it uses the green Street Fighter 2 Dash logo. One of the kind of points of controversy back in the day is that Capcom would take all of the Japanese artwork for Street Fighter, this beautiful artwork, and then just not use it at all. And in fact, you'd see the American versions, they didn't like this idea of a full frontal portrait of the characters. They wanted to actually show them engaged in a street fight. Honestly, I don't really buy that they had to change the artwork to get people to buy Street Fighter 2. Like, everybody already knew what Street Fighter 2 was. Street Fighter 2 was really popular. It's not like somebody's gonna look at this and go, oh, Street Fighter 2, but that guy isn't actively punching someone, so I'm not gonna buy it. It's kind of strange. So the Sega Master System was 1985 hardware, and it's kind of a minor miracle that they were even able to get a version of Street Fighter II on that hardware at all. But to do it, they had to make some pretty major sacrifices, and we can start learning about those sacrifices just by looking at the back of the box. So, I mean, again, here's our logo on our screenshots again, and then it actually lists out all the playable characters on the back of the box. You've got Ryu, M. Bison, Ken, Guile, Chun-Li, Blanca, Sagat, and Balrog. And that's it. That's only 8 characters. That's not 12 characters. And even with all those cuts, this is still a really huge game in terms of the amount of memory. It's actually an 8 megabit game. And even with all that extra memory, they could only do 8 of the 12 characters. So it is time once again to go inside the box. And by box, I mean this really cool plastic keep case, because Sega Master System games, just like Sega Genesis games, came in a plastic box instead of a cardboard box. And here's the manual. Now, this is where we start to see even more sacrifices that had to be made to get Street Fighter II onto the Master System. Because here is Ryu. Here is how you do his Hadoken, which is referred to here as a Bola de Fogo, which I'm really hoping I'm not embarrassing myself. I'm pretty sure that means a ball of fire. And then also he has his Hurricane Kick, and you kind of want to flip to the next page to find his Dragon Punch, but it's not there. There's no Shoryuken listed in this manual because Ryu cannot do a Shoryuken in the Master System version, which is kind of crazy. I mean, like that's the move, right? That's the iconic Street Fighter Rising Dragon Punch uppercut. That's what he used to put the big old scar on Sagat's body. Like, that was the move. It's the Dragon Punch, you know? Balrog apparently has one move. He has his headbutt, and that's it. And that's really just an indication of the kind of big sacrifices that they had to make to even just make this a reality at all. So from the arcade perfection of the X68000 version all the way over to the it's a miracle this even exists Master System version, I think this gives you an idea of the incredible range of different home editions of Street Fighter II that were out there and were very popular all over the world. Thanks for watching Complete in Box, and we'll see you next time.